Ever since the release of Counter-Strike 2, I've been curious about how TF2 would look if it were also remade in Source 2. With that in mind, I dedicated part of my life to porting and partially remastering one of TF2's maps, Junction. To break it all down, the differences between the Source 1 and Source 2 versions are as you'd expect with the modern game engine. The lighting is better, the shadows are better, the reflections are better, and the overall experience with managing materials, models, and meshes, incorporating map logic, adding post-processing, and finally compiling, made this project more enjoyable than anything I've done in Source 1. Yes, I had to go through the painstaking task of porting one material at a time, but it was worth it. And this time around, with the help of some folks from Mapcore, I didn't have to. So I was able to skip the grueling parts to port not 1, not 2, not even 3, but 4 separate maps to Source 2. And this time, I'm going to show you how you can use what I've recently learned to port any TF2 map to Source 2. I'm also going to provide more commentary as I go through things, so for a full technical breakdown, I encourage you, if you haven't already, to also watch my previous video on porting Junction, where I go much deeper into the engine. This video is sponsored by Manco.store, a TF2 marketplace where you can buy and sell TF2 items for real money. I've personally used them many times in the past and can vouch for their great prices and low fees. You can check them out through the link in the description. The first thing you need to do is install Counter-Strike 2 and the CSGO Legacy version. You can do the latter by going to the game's properties in Steam, selecting betas, and in this drop-down menu, CSGO Legacy. You'll need this to port the Source 1 content. Next, go to this import tool documentation page and follow the instructions under Getting Started. It'll walk you through installing Python, setting up environment variables, and accessing the script. It might seem like a lot, but I promise it's not that bad. However, as of making this video, there are a couple of out-of-the-box issues that need to be fixed for the script to work. First, open the import map community script in a text editor like Notepad and delete the part that says decode. Now go to this directory and rename the vpk.signatures file to anything else. Note that if you reinstall the game, you'll have to go through these steps again. With those two things out of the way, it's time to extract your TF2 content into the appropriate directory for the script to read. In this example, I'll be using 2fort. Most of TF2's assets are located in two pack files called TF2 misc directory and TF2 textures directory. To access them, you can use GCFscape or the more recently developed Source 2 viewer, which, as the name states, can also view Source 2 files. Regardless of which software you choose, you'll need to extract the contents of these two pack files into the following directory located within the CSGO Legacy game files, which should look similar to TF2's as far as the name structure goes. There's a chance that the map you're porting uses some Half-Life 2 assets, as was the case with these windows when I was porting Mercenary Park. For that, you can manually extract the textures from the Half-Life 2 textures and misc directory pack files and then rerun the script. Or you can configure them manually using the material editor. Again, for a more thorough breakdown of the various editors and material creation, watch my video on Junction. If you're porting a community-made map, it likely has some custom files that aren't included within these pack files. In that case, you'll have to extract those too. And to do that, I recommend using a program called BSP Source, which you'll probably need to use anyway if you don't already have the VMF file of the map you want to port. Assuming you don't have either, here's what you gotta do. Click the Add button in BSP Source and locate the map you want to port. If it's a workshop map, it'll be located in this directory within one of these folders. The numbers represent the workshop ID, which you can find in the URL on the map's workshop page. If the map is already in the game, it'll be within TF2's maps folder in this directory. If you suspect the map of having custom assets not included in the game's pack files, tick the Extract Embedded Files box in the Other tab before hitting Decompile. Wherever you save the decompiled VMF file, there will also be a folder containing the materials, models, and any other custom assets that were packed into the BSP, which you'll have to dump into the same directory as the contents of the two pack files. In my case, 2Fort doesn't have any custom assets, so my folder is empty. Now open the decompiled VMF in Source 1's Hammer editor. You don't need Hammer++, that's just the version I have enabled by default. You can also use the vanilla version located here, or simply open the VMF in a text editor and delete the comment decompiled by BSP source. In Hammer, you can do that under the Map tab in Map Properties. Now save the VMF, create a new folder called Maps, throw it in there, and create another folder called whatever you want with the Maps folder inside. We will reference this folder's path when configuring the script. The final step before running the script is creating a folder for the ported assets. Back in Steam, go to Counter-Strike 2's Properties, DLC, and enable Counter-Strike 2 Workshop Tools. I believe you can also do this within the in-game settings where it says Install Counter-Strike Workshop Tools. Either way, when you click Play in Steam, you should be prompted to select one of three options. Select Counter-Strike 2 Workshop Tools and play. A new pop-up should appear, which is where you'll create the folder for the ported assets. I'm gonna go with CTF_2Fort_S2. Now double-click it to launch the tools for good measure, which should boot the game normally, along with a separate window titled Asset Browser, which is how you access things like the Hammer editor, Material editor, Model doc, and Post-processing editor. Now close the Asset Browser and exit the game. It is finally time to run the script, and it's important that you listen very carefully. Before you run the script, there are 5 separate fields you should have saved to paste in. The first is the directory to the CSGO Legacy GameInfo.txt file, which you will find in this directory. The second is the directory to the folder that holds the Maps folder that holds the decompiled VMF of our map. The third is the directory to Counter-Strike 2's GameInfo.gi file located here. The fourth is the name we gave the folder when we launched the workshop tools for the first time. And lastly, the fifth is the name of the VMF. There are 2 ways you can run the script. You can use the GUI or run it in a command prompt. To use the GUI, run the import map community GUI exe and paste each of those 5 fields you have saved in their respective boxes. You'll want to make sure that generate and use BSP on import is enabled because that'll clean up your map and make it work better for Source 2. Then all that's left to do is click OK and let the script run. Alternatively, you can open a command line within the import scripts folder and enter the 5 fields following python import map community.py and then adding -use BSP at the end. Note that the 3 directories will have to be in quotes. After running the script, it'll start converting the map and assets, which might take a while depending on how much the script has to go through. But it'll tell you when it's finished, at which point you can boot up the tools again, click on the hammer icon, and go to File, Open, and within the folder you named earlier under Content, CSGO Add-ons, you should find the VMap file of your map inside of the Maps folder. This is Source 2's version of the VMF, and when you open it, you should see all or most of the map fully textured with all of the models already configured for you. However, this is where the real work begins, because if you just compile it as is, it won't look any better than Source 1. In fact, it'll probably look worse. You see, the whole point of doing this is to take advantage of Source 2's PBR system, which stands for Physically Based Rendering. That means adding roughness maps to control a material's reflectance, normal maps to control a material's bumpiness, metallic maps to mark the parts that are metallic, as well as several others like ambient occlusion or fake shadows, self-illumination for glowing materials, and tint masks for tinting. That's what makes Source 2 so special, and that's what can make maps better than Source 1. When porting Junction, and these other 4 maps I'll get to in a second, I took full advantage of this and created normal and roughness maps for almost every material. And yeah, I probably wasted a lot of time tweaking them to be exactly how I wanted for a mere YouTube video, but I wanted to show everyone a proper port, or at least as proper as a port can be. I want to start off by analyzing the first of these 4 maps I ported, Upward. Believe it or not, this wasn't the first time I ported the map. A long time ago, I made a video about how to port TF2 maps to Blender where I went through Upward as an example. which nowadays is kind of obsolete thanks to the work of his animations porting a bunch of Source 1 content to Blender. I then made a short showing part of the map, to which user Lee Epic Bacon Man 1553 commented that the shadows were ugly, that there's nothing wrong with how the game looks now, and that the accuracy of the lighting goes against TF2's cartoony art style. I've heard these 3 points reiterated many times over by dozens of people ever since I made that video, and I think part of that is my fault, because looking at this shot of Upward, even though it was rendered using a ray tracer in Blender, it looks terrible. And at the time, I joked that it was too good. But putting that aside and looking at this shot of Upward in Source 2, I wonder if those people would feel the same way, because I made a community post showing this map and many people thought it was Source 1 just with some improved lighting or something. So that begs the question, is Lee Epic Bacon Man 1553 correct? I might be biased, and that's sort of a loaded question, but I would make the case that he's not, and here's why. You can create results in Source 2 that are shockingly similar to Source 1. To reiterate, many people thought that this scene in Upward was taken in Source 1, and that's with me adding PBR maps for all of the materials, tweaking the lighting, and even messing around with the post-processing, which goes to show how good TF2 can look. But the thing is, I could have made it resemble the original even more, or deviated further from it. In my Source 2 port, these roof tiles in the distance above Blue Spawn have a very strong specular reflection that is non-existent in Source 1. It comes from the light cast by the sun overhead, and appears this way because of the angle formed between the sun and the player standing on the ground. Unlike Source 1, we can actually see it because I made the roughness very low, added a cube map, and using a normal map, added some depth around the ridges between the tiles. Finally, I added something called a tone mapper to fix these blown out areas where the brightness is so high that the color can't get any brighter and starts to clump together or clip. I can remove the tone mapper and other effects, and already we're that much closer to a true copy. But do we really want to just copy Source 1? Is this version worse? Is the art style being lost? Is there nothing wrong with how TF2 looks in Source 1? Hopefully your answer isn't a hasty yes, and you're all starting to see the potential of Source 2 and how it can improve TF2. Let's look at this next example, Barnblitz. The first thing you probably notice comparing it to the original is that the sun is gone, but in reality, I just moved it over here because that's where the light that shines on the map is actually coming from. That's right, the sun isn't aligned with the map's light environment entity, and it's not even close. Anyway, another thing you may have noticed is how much more ambient light is present that brightens areas like this shed, cliff, building, boxes, and silo. You can thank Source 2's ray tracer for that, which fires beams of light off surrounding surfaces and then into these areas, providing a subtle yet noticeable boost in illumination that ends up getting baked into the map upon compiling. If you were looking closely, you may have also noticed it in Upward, particularly underneath the edges of these roofs and in this wood support. The third thing you probably noticed in Barnblitz is the specular reflections on the front of Blue Spawn building. There are also some on the cart, this hanging light and shutter, wall, and silo. Just like in Upward, this is formed by the angle of the light combined with the roughness and normal maps. In fact, I can show the individual roughness and normal maps throughout the map under the Tools Visualization mode in Hammer or Matte Fullbright command in-game. We can sort of do the same thing in Source 1 with the command Matte Normal Maps, which I want to spend a moment on. While this command accurately depicts the normal and SS bump maps for all materials throughout the map, there's still a lot missing, and that's not because the command is failing to capture them, they're really just not there. Just try walking through a map and picking materials you think have normal maps, and you'll see what I mean. The SS bump, however, is a little more interesting, but I already talked about that in a separate video, so go watch that after finishing this one. Perhaps the biggest difference behind all the bells and whistles of the PBR maps is the props. In Source 1, they use what's called vertex lighting, and in case you're wondering, I did upload something about that too. So without going deep into that, I'm just gonna say that it's pretty bad and Source 2 rightfully abandoned it. After baking all the lighting and compiling, we get beautiful high-resolution light maps. This is a big deal because it allows us to get these amazing shadows on all of the props, just like with regular world geometry. But of course, there's a caveat when it comes to props that move, which I'll get to in the next map, Mercenary Park. This one is interesting for multiple reasons. In Source 1, some of the foliage sways, which wasn't captured by the porting script because I don't believe the tree sway parameter exists in Source 2. As such, the ones in my version don't sway. But they could probably be animated the traditional way, so I wouldn't exactly consider that a lost feature. What's more interesting to me anyway is the shadows. In Source 1, there aren't really any. I mean, there are in places like behind this tire, building, shack, and so on, but as far as the plants go, most of them have shadows disabled. I say this is interesting because the reasons behind disabling shadows on these props in Source 1 still sort of exist in Source 2. Like, look at this palm tree in the middle. In my version, I added shadows to it, which causes the back faces to go dark, which kind of looks off and arguably worse than Source 1, which has them straight up disabled. I can remedy this by enabling this don't flip back face normals parameter in Source 2, which is sort of an improvement, but still looks a little off to me. Also, if this tree were animated, it would no longer cast baked shadows, but dynamic ones, and dynamic shadows have the major drawback of being perfectly crisp. This is fine in CS2 maps like Biome, where it suits the atmosphere, but not a gloomy map like Mercenary Park with an overcast sky and soft shadows. A couple of things I am happy with, however, are how easy it is to configure the water, and this smooth shading at the front of the visitor center. In Source 1, there's this harsh shadow on part of the wall that we don't have to worry about in Source 2 thanks to the soft normals function. The last thing I want to mention about this map is the sign that says Mercenary Park. It's much darker in my version because I converted its material from unlit generic to light map generic, meaning the map's lighting gets baked into it like any other piece of world geometry. Valve originally made it unlit generic because it's facing away from the map's light source, and so if it did use the light source, it'd be way too dark. However, I thought that was a bit cheaty, so I turned it into a light map generic, which as expected, made it super dark, so I added some light rect entities to mimic the ambient light cast onto the backside of the mountain. It's a lot darker than before, but it casts shadows and should be more realistic. However, at the end of the day, this is an artistic choice, and some of you might very well prefer a brighter, less shadowy version like in Source 1. The final map I've ported is Kong King by 3DNJ, and I'm just gonna say it. This map is fire. It's not until seeing it in Source 2 that everything appears flat and dull in Source 1, where the buildings are lit uniformly in this yellow light with hardly any shadows. But that is not at all the case in Source 2. We have bright and dark spots where it makes sense, the colors are punchier, the neon signs and lanterns actually glow, and just look at those beautiful specular highlights from the moon and warm touch from the light pole on this roof above the control point. Also, remember how I said I'd get back to the soft normals thing? Well, look at the corners of these apartment floors. The moonlight forms a nice gradient around them, even though I only added one edge thanks to normal softening. I'm actually so happy with how this section of the map turned out that part of me wishes I had done the whole thing. But seeing as this is a community-made map, I'd want to have the endorsement of 3DNJ to do that, just like I did with Sean for Junction. The last thing I want to emphasize that applies to all of these maps is the post-processing, because what you're seeing isn't just a raw render, it's being manipulated by tone mapping, curves, bloom, saturation and vibrance, and color balance layers unique to each map. I had to mention this because Source 1 support for post-processing is incredibly limited. We typically don't see a color correction entity to begin with, and the tone map controller only sets the bloom and exposure adjustment, which is the fake HDR effect you see when moving from bright to dark areas and vice versa. I've put together a Google Doc linked in the description with a bunch of resources for porting TF2 maps to Source 2. So give it a read and or join not only my Discord server, but the Source Engine and Mapcore servers as well, since there are a lot more people who know more than I that can help you. So what was the point of all of this? We can't play on these maps, and even if we could, it'd have to be in CS2. Well, part of it is curiosity, but I also think it's a good way for us to dip our toes in the water when it comes to imagining an official TF2 port to Source 2. I know a bunch of you are gonna say that it'll never happen because Valve supposedly screwed up with CS2, they're focused on deadlock, they can't count to 3, etc. But I don't care. I'm gonna keep dreaming because TF2 deserves to thrive. This game may very well be the best first-person shooter I will have ever played by the time I die, and because of that, I want to see what more can become of it. And because map making and doing 3D stuff in general is kind of my thing, this is my way of contributing. The fact that anybody watches my videos and gets any amount of enjoyment from them is enough reason for me to keep doing this stuff, keep wishing, and keep creating. And who knows, maybe one day Valve will bless us and we'll get Team Fortress in Source 2. Thank you for watching. This is LED switching off.